Recording in progress.
Good afternoon. It is 2 p.m. Per council rules, when a new members a committee of new members taking play, then that the person who is senior, not in terms of time, but in terms of service on council, age, but in terms of service on council.
It could be age too.
Let's offer let's take care of the meeting. So let me go ahead and call the meeting to order. At the meeting, I'm calling all this Community Impact Grants Committee meeting. The first item on that agenda is the adoption of the agenda. So I'll entertain a motion for the adoption of the agenda.
Sorry, can we do the roll call, Mr. Livingston, please?
Roll call, thank you.
Mr. Senior Member.
It's time to pass it on so quick.
McBride, Livingston.
Yes, present.
Barron.
Here.
Mackey.
Here.
English.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Next item is adoption of the agenda.
So moved.
Moved, it's been properly seconded. The changes, deletions. There'll be none. Can you call the roll for the adoption of the agenda?
Livingston.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Next item is item 3, which is the election of the chair. And then motion for the election of the chair.
Mr. Chair, may I be recognized?
Recognized.
I'd like to nominate Councilmember Cheryl English for chair.
The nomination, that's second.
Second.
Properly second, you know. Call the roll for the
Livingston.
Yes.
Barron.
Yes.
Mackey.
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Congratulations, and I will now turn it over to you, again with item 4.
Awesome. And Livingston, first let me thank my counterparts for your endorsement for me as chair, and just to be able to facilitate this committee. I thank you for that, and I appreciate the opportunity. We're going to move straight on into item 4, which is item for discussion 4A, and its Community Impact Grant Committee purpose to rename the Discretionary Grant Committee to the Community Impact Grant Committee and add additional council members to this committee. This comes from the council's recent budget motion to allocate an additional $300,000 to the committee and develop a process that creates accountability and transparency. We'll open it up for discussion.
Madam Chair.
To be recognized.
Thank you. I just wanted to, point out as the maker of the initial motion during our budget period about renaming the committee. And initially, we had a discretionary grants committee, and now being able to refocus and making this the Community Impact Grant Committee and add additional members with the goal of really creating accountability and transparency in the process and being able to inform all organizations how to go about receiving grants from the county. So I'm happy to see that, as a body, we've been able to all move in the same direction and are working towards getting this done for the community. Thank you.
Additional comment?
Clarification, some questions for clarification. This committee, when we say community impact grants, so we're only talking about the $300,000, or we're talking about all the grant funds, lump sum, and everything else. What's the clarity in terms of exactly what grants this committee is responsible for?
If I may, Mr. Brown, if you can correct me at any time, but this is the lump sum appropriations that a lot of the agencies and organizations have not even filled out or filed an application, and county council members they go to a county council member and they say, we need funds, and then there's no accountability for their actions or a paper trail or audit trail, if you will, to actually go back and check these funds. And so this gives more accountability, not just to the council member, but to those agencies and organizations. And Mr. Brown, if I've left anything out, please feel free to.
Ms. English, did you want to recognize your colleague first before?
I'm sorry. I got to remember to look up. Thank you, Mr. Brown, Ms. Mackey.
Thank you. And so, Mr. Livingston, I wanted to point out, I guess, I was under the impression that part of kind of what you mentioned or what you asked was part of, this committee's kind of purpose is to determine what that looks like. I think we know we have a committee that looks at hospitality dollars, right? We know that exists. And we know we have a process already through Ms. Barron and the COVID committee of how to handle ARPA dollars. But this committee in the past has looked at funds from the general fund and how, when it was discretionary funds, how we were going to use that. And so changing it, my thought process was that this committee would still decide as council members, how do we want to take money from the general fund and then use it to work with organizations so that we can see an impact in our community and that we decide what that looks like. But I don't think it controls all the grants. We have, staff that handles grants as it relates to CDBG grants, but it was my understanding this was for council. So I'll let Mr. Brown go, but I guess that was my thinking unless council had another thought.
Thank you, both Chair English and Councilmember Mackey. Directly, Mr. Livingston, to your question, that is our purpose as staff here is to get from you how you will utilize this committee. And it was not our understanding as staff that this would be applying to all grant funding, but it was specific to the budget process as it relates to general fund dollars that had been requested through council members so that you can establish a process similar to what Ms. Mackey said, but just in general, what we talked about in the budget process as well. I think Mr. Malinowski also mentioned it. What is the process that is used, that is equitable, that is fair, that is open and transparent to give anyone that is interested in applying for funds an opportunity to do it through the budget process?
Ms. Barron.
Thank you, Chair English. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear. It is any grant that's the budget process. And so we no longer have the discretionary grant committee. This is that committee now. So all the tasks that was assigned to that committee before would fall here in addition to the additional dollars or whatever we decide to do from this day forward.
That's correct.
Thank you.
I thought there's more urgent need though that $300,000 was something that we agreed to allocate like soon. But how would that impact items C and B and C though if we don't figure out a way to separate that out? If that's is that what we're gonna do for now? That's what's kind of confusing me in terms of what we're gonna do when. For example, we've already. I mean, I guess, will there be, when you do the 300 additional, there is no other lump sum money to allocate, right? That was the question, yeah.
But
Madam
I'm
Chair.
thinking, and help me, Ms. Mackey, as the maker of this motion. Currently, we have the process in place. And because of time, we're not going to have enough time to go back and redo, because it would take a lot of going back and forth. And I won't say going back and forth, but it would take a lot of working with staff and the time frame. We would keep the current process and in the future be able to determine what this looks like. If it's 300,000, if it's 500,000, if it's $1 million, whatever the process is that we as a council choose. And then the committee chooses, and then we take that before the full council.
Madam Chair. Thank you. This is Mr. Livingston. It was, I think, to answer your question, when you look at B, that is the breakdown of the money that was already approved and given out in the budget. And so we have additional 300,000 that we do need to determine how we're going to distribute, but that's for this budget year. And so what Councilmember English was saying was, due to time, we do need to, quickly decide how we would like to distribute that $300,000 to the community so they'll have time to spend it before a new budget year. But this committee should also be thinking about moving forward for next budget cycle. How do we want to work with community organizations to distribute funds in a way that is transparent and equitable, and that we all know what organizations are doing, but that we can also see how they impacted the community. I think at the end of the day, if we're going to distribute funds to the community, we should be able, all of us should be able to explain to any of our constituents why we gave to an organization and how that organization has used tax dollars to impact the community and how we can see those changes. So for B is just really looking at organizations that we've already funded in this fiscal year so that we're all aware, but then we do need to agree upon the process for distributing an additional 300,000.
And that's exactly what I was getting at. Is I thought our focus might need to be on the 300,000 since that money is there now. We need to allocate it and so forth, and then worry about B and C once we get a handle on A, because that's more urgent. Is try to figure out a way for us to focus more on.
English.
Aaron, you're right.
And so I hear you, Mr. Livingston, and I guess this may be a timing question for Administrator Brown, and that is we're starting, even though it seems like, oh, it's just only October, but if we are going to need to do something quite quickly in order for you to be able to do what you need to do on the budget side of things. How urgent is that part?
Yes. So if you were to, and I know I don't want to jump ahead, but if you were, by way of example, in your packet, I think it's on page 8, is that the discretionary committee grant guidelines page? I just want to show you from a timeline perspective. If you looked at that and you said, okay, here is how that process normally runs out. Right now, we're actually in the first month of the second quarter of the fiscal year. So anything that you would do time-wise now, be mindful that those organizations have reporting they have to do to be in, to spend those funds so that all those documents can be reviewed and make sure they're good to go and that the county can be in compliance with how it uses those funds. So you're really talking about a very tight timeline. And for some of these organizations, it may not even be realistic this current fiscal budget cycle to award funding that they have to spend in 2 or 3 months and then give us all the reporting. That's something for you to consider. for their own benefit. So to your question, Ms. Barron, first month, second quarter of the fiscal year, whatever you do now, plus budget, plus information going out, you're probably giving folks less than 30 or 45 days to really do something with a program that they have to turn around and give accounting for. So just be mindful of that for both the potential grant recipient first, and then for your reporting cycle that the county has to do with those funds.
So if I may, that is a concern, because as we look at how we want to move forward with programming, ideally to be able to have these funds out in the community would be wonderful. But I do want to make sure that this body we are very conscious of not setting anyone up for failure, while at the same time, do we have time to do what we need to do? And if we do, part of me feels comfortable about doing this, but I just want to make sure that we have the support of the staff and the support to make sure that you all can carry out what our desires are. Thank you.
I'd like to recognize Ms. McBride. Thank you. That's okay. Good to have you. Are there any additional comments?
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
I believe the page was page 8 in your packet that shows a proposed schedule of what that would look like. So if you were looking for a timeline of how that would be, I guess, pushed, if you were trying to do something, that I believe is on page 8 of your packet under the proposed schedule. So, it's up on the screen as well, if you're able to look at your screen. I just want to allow that to be specific so you can take a look at that and see what that may possibly look like.
Oh, my question is, this proposal is based on current applications that are received now, or is this additional? Is this new?
No, ma'am, you would be opening up a new process, because this is a different grant opportunity specific to the community impact grants. And so that's what you would be looking at, a compressed timeline to do any of that. But that's what it looks like, spelled out specifically.
This framework that's on page 8 that you're referring to.
Right, that's a timeline that you'd be utilizing, because again, it would have to go to council for approval, and then the rest of that would roll out, and that's the staff telling you, here's how we could make that happen. But again, the only thing that I would point out is the burden, if you want to call it that, the responsibility you're putting on the recipient, the timeline that they would have for this particular budget cycle. This doesn't mean like next year, but this is talking about funds for this fiscal year. So this is not a future conversation. This is speaking about the specific $300,000 allocation for this fiscal year. That's what the timeline would look like, today being October the 17th. Or 18th, sorry. I took a day.
Ms. Mack.
Thank you. I appreciate staff's recommendation as we're talking about item 5A now in the schedule. I appreciate the recommendation. I realize that the time frame is shorter than normal, but I think if we made a motion that we were going to put additional money, that we should work hard to at least give those the opportunity to get the money this year instead of not doing anything with it at all. Thank you.
McBride, you're recognized.
Apologize.
Excuse me.
But we can blame it on somebody you know, but I'm not going to call any names. Anyway, I guess I'm concerned, and I don't know whether this has been discussed. I think maybe this is part of the short turnaround time. Is that the discussion that's underway now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Given as much as we already have the ARPA funds out there, and there are opportunities that are basically in line with the 300,000 that was put there for most people that could apply for funds. I'm not sure. And then we already have the $200,000 discretionary funds that people have already been awarded for this year, right?
Correct.
Okay. So that leaves us with this $300,000 for them to try to expend within the next 6 months or so.
Yes, ma'am.
Because we got to process it now. And I think that given that we have the funds out there, and this is a community impact, I'm not sure because of hopefully the people that will be applying for it, many maybe be the first time, hopefully, because this will allow those that could not apply for funding before they receive it, that I'm not sure of the timeline, because if you do grants and write grants and implement programs, once it's approved, it's going to take a while to plan and actually implement. They're probably going to have less than 3 months to actually implement that plan that they do, less than 3 or 4 months. So I'm wondering if, to make sure that we don't lose the money, is it possible to that we can make a motion to carry those funds over for the next fiscal year, or find a way? I'm just afraid that they will not be able to expend the money and it will be rushed through.
Is that a question to me, Ms. McBride?
That's a statement. Okay. That's a statement I'm making. So I would, and I know that through, I guess we could do a budget amendment. That's a question. I'm sure that we can do a budget amendment that will allow the 300,000 to be carried over.
Recognize.
As to comment to that, I do understand concern about being able to spend it, but I do feel like there were some organizations when we went through the budget process that didn't apply for ARPA, aren't going to apply for ARPA because of the steps it took to go through ARPA, and maybe their program didn't necessarily meet those ARPA guidelines. And so for this type of grant that is, at the max $15,000, there are some organizations that saw we approved as a body additional $300,000 in the budget and thought they were going to have the opportunity to apply for it. So even though we may not think they have time, I think if you put it out there, the ones that do have time and the opportunity, it gives them the opportunity to apply for it this year, and then they apply again next year. Whereas now they may have lost the opportunity, because just like the ones in the discretionary, when it was a discretionary grant committee that applied for the 200, we couldn't select all those people. We only gave out 200. So there are some that still have that same great program that maybe want to apply again and can, edit the program a little to get it done, and they feel comfortable getting done. So I would rather put the opportunity out there and have organizations decide than to not give the opportunity at all.
Right, you're right.
And I understand that position as well, but I'm talking about the various options and the supposedly consequences of one over the other one. I didn't know that this was never, during the budget process, we didn't say $15,000 was allocated for this. $15,000 is allocated for the discretionary grant fund, but we didn't say for the new amount of money for the $300,000 that was appropriated, because that's different. So that's another thing, not that they couldn't apply for 10, 5, or 15,000, but it was not limited to 15,000. And given what you said, Ms. Mackey, in terms of there may be people, like you said, that want to apply for it. So I'm trying to find a way that they could do the 6 months that we are funded. And then if there's some type of clause, because I know it's a fiscal year, so we have to have new money, would that be where there would be a continuation for the next 6 months? Because then that would actually give them the opportunity to really fully implement the program. So you follow me, Mr. Brown?
I do follow you. So Madam Chair, may I?
Yes, sir.
There are a couple of things that you all have talked about, so I want to point out so that hopefully by the conclusion of this meeting, you could have had an opportunity, especially if you want to move forward with this item. So one thing, the schedule that is listed out shows you what we will do if this committee decides to forward to full council. So I think that's a decision point that we need to make before the committee time expires. I think the other thing is you raised something that was sort of kind of discussed here. I think the purpose is clear, but I think what the staff was also looking for is the fill-in information. So we're actually talking about, as Ms. Mackey pointed out, part of 4A and also part of 5A. So as a part of that, Ms. McBride, to get back to what you were saying, we also need to really determine what are the limits. So the discretionary committee, which we're not talking about here today, does have award limits. You all have not established that for this. So I think that's another decision point where this committee would need to have a recommendation for council. If you decide to take it to council, you have the purpose. Are you going to approve the grant funding for this fiscal cycle? And then what are going to be the award limits, if any, for the $300,000? So the staff will need to do that to do a good job of meeting this out. In terms of the fiscal year and the monies, my thought would be if there is funding left over from the awards, then those funds, the council could certainly decide to, given this situation, move the remaining funds to be added to your future budget cycle. We want to try to get away from that for a number of reasons, but to your point, Ms. McBride, we could do that. Automatically saying that they'll get another 6 months in the next fiscal year, that would be a pre-approved budget process, and I'm not sure if this committee and or council would want to do that in advance, not knowing what other funding you're going to want to do. So you can do it. I think that's a little bit different, but the answer to your question is yes, but it would certainly be a budgetary decision that you're making for next budget year cycle ahead of knowing anything else. So hopefully that wasn't too convoluted.
No, I understand.
So I appreciate the question, and hopefully you have some decision points that we can get through.
No, I understand. That's why I said I knew that we couldn't be transferred, but I do understand the continuation process. But I can talk to you later because I don't want to hold up.
Oh, you're fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Livingston, and then
The reason I thought the $300,000 was allocated for this fiscal year when we were voting on it. That's what I thought.
Yes.
That's after ancient criteria, do anything, can we just simply go ahead on and just allocate it, do the applications for this year and try and move on and not make it complicated?
Oh, we were open for.
That was a question.
yes, sir.
So yes, sir, Mr. Livingston, but you can, but you do have to decide the criteria that you're going to use.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yeah, so looking at it and based off staff's recommendation and the time frame that we know we have, I do agree, basically what Mr. Livingston just said, that we keep with the process that we've already used, that folks have been familiar with, and keep the same application and move forward with the schedule. And then after this meeting, we can have those full discussions of what does this look like next budget year? And in that way, we're giving organizations enough time to understand if we're changing the process, if we want a new application, what is it going to look like? And we have time to look at all that instead of trying to change everything right now. And so I think it is the simplest thing to get the money out is to keep what we have and allow folks to apply that way. And then our next meetings we'll have between now and let's say, next year, March, April, to really flesh out a new application. We can set limits. We can, have many different categories. We can do whatever we want and decide the amount because we don't have to keep 300,000. We can decide whatever the budget is that we as a council wants to decide. But it does seem based on our time frame that keeping the same application would be the easiest thing for organizations at this point.
Do we need a motion, Madam Chair?
Just in discussion, I just wanted to move. I think we've covered them, but B and C.
Question about motion, Ms. Mack.
Yeah, motion to accept the staff's recommendation and time schedule submitted to the committee.
Second.
Any discussion? Ms. Mayor.
So I'm for it. Absolutely. I think that we need to be clear to the applicants that this is a short-term project. So I think that somewhere in our language, we need to, I don't want them to get confused with the traditional way, like this is a short-term project, i.e. 4 to 6 months kind of thing, so that we don't run into the challenges of, oh my goodness, now we're here at the end of the fiscal year and people have not even implemented their project. So somewhere we need to make sure that it's clearly articulated that it's a short-term project.
We take the vote. Please forgive me. I'd like to recognize Mr. Bill Malinowski. He's usually quiet down there. So thank you for joining us. So any other discussion? If not, Ms. Carrillo, can you call for the vote?
McBride, Livingston,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved.
If we can, let's look at 4B, fiscal year 23 lump sum discretionary grant allocations on page 2. Are there any questions, concerns, or comments with that? I think we've kind of interchangeably discussing these as we've been going along.
This is just
But Brad, you
this is just for information.
Yes, ma'am.
In terms of that. Now, there's one other discretionary. Is that okay? Is there another discretionary grant process besides these three? From the community or from community, is there?
Maybe you're referring to something in maybe like CDBG related funding. Is that what you're referring to? The other grant opportunities? Are you referring to specific funding allocated by the council?
Not by council. So this is the funding here was these grants went through the discretionary council's discretionary committee. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So isn't there another discretionary grant process that is comprised of citizens?
There is hospitality tax and accommodations tax who have related committees, but
there's not another one. Okay. Thank you.
No comment. We can move on to C, current discretionary grant policy, which is what we've been discussing. And this is what Ms. Barron and Livingston have been referring to. Continue with these policies. Any questions or concern regarding these from either the council or the staff?
have a comment.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. McBride.
Staff, I remember when the staff revised this grant process, and I think they did a really good job of explaining the grants, and I really like the rubric and the evaluation process. And this was the type of process that I've been looking for, where that it makes it easier to understand. So I think the staff did a good job with this, and this has been in place for several years now. And I think that they've always had that accountability through this process. I just want to thank the staff for it.
Thank you on behalf of the staff, Ms. McBride.
No additional comments. We'll move on to item 5A, and this is for action criteria application for schedule for CIG funds. And this is located on page 8 through 17 that we've been discussing.
Madam Chair, I believe that my previous motion has already covered that item.
Yes.
Yes.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
Wait, Madam Chair.
Yes.
One question.
Yes.
I am sorry, I was 15 minutes late. The beginning on the background information, when we move this to council, will that part be there? Will you address some of the other issues I raised? Can I speak to Mr. Chair, Madam Chair?
Yes.
Mr. Administrator.
Yes, ma'am, Ms. McBride. And to be specific, there was a question about some of the language that was used in the term of eliminating lump sum.
Yes.
And that wasn't the actual language that was used. And so, yes, we will correct the information to reflect what was said and not, add anything that wasn't said.
All right, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
That's a big
Motion to adjourn?
second.
Philip? Call for the vote.
McBride,
Yes.
Livingston,
Yes.
Mackey,
Yes.
English.
Yes.
Motion approved. Barron,
Yes.
motion approved. We can adjourn.